The metal slammed against the gates so violently I thought the hinges might tear clean off. Screams echoed through the air, raw, panicked, as hands rattled the fence like a scene from a zombie flick. And there I was, calm as ever, sipping sweet tea from my rocking chair on the only porch not locked behind their shiny new prison yard. Yep, that's me. You're probably wondering how the entire Willowbrook HOA ended up trapped in their own designer suburb, and why I'm the only one with the key. Truth is, I never asked for trouble, just a little quiet, a place to breathe. That's why I bought the old Miller Ranch. 25 acres of wild grass, honest dirt, and sky so full of stars it made you believe in something bigger. Then came the bulldozers. Then came Willowbrook Estates, with their manicured lawns and tree-lined streets named after the very trees they bulldozed. I kept to myself until the notes started showing up. Snide comments about my fence, my cattle, even the dust from my truck. I laughed it off, thinking they were just confused. My land wasn't theirs, it was never part of their HOA kingdom. But the letters kept coming, then the visits. Karen Abernathy, their self-crowned queen, showed up in her spotless SUV waving rulebooks like they were the law. They tried to find me, shame me, box me in. Then one morning I woke up to a new fence cutting across my pasture. Barbed wire, signs claiming my land now belonged to Willowbrook. They stole my road, fenced in my fields, and acted like I should be grateful. But while they played their petty games, I was recording everything, every illegal move, every smug threat, every trespass. They thought I was just some dumb farmer. They didn't realize I had receipts, lawyers, and more grit than they could ever imagine. They built a cage thinking they'd trap me in it. But in the end, all they did was lock themselves inside. They built that illegal fence like they owned the damn place. Like the battle was over and the stubborn rancher with his dusty driveway and outdated livestock had finally been put in his place. I let them think that. I smiled and waved when Karen drove by. I nodded at the HOA president when we crossed paths at the feed store. I even left a sarcastic, "Thanks for the improvements," comment under their smug Facebook post. But behind the scenes I was collecting everything, relentlessly, methodically. Every violation, every trespass, every inch of that shiny new fence was documented. I took photos of the posts that crossed 6 feet onto my land, recorded contractors dumping debris onto my fields, filmed board meetings they tried to keep private while discussing how to deal with the ranch problem. Every insult, every arrogant move, time-stamped, cataloged, backed up in triplicate. And late at night, after the chores were done and the sun had sunk behind the hills, I sat at my kitchen table, fingers tracing the old maps and yellow deeds that told the story of this land, my land. That's when I found it, buried in the county archives, a forgotten easement from 83 years ago, signed by my great-grandfather Eli Miller. It granted the Miller Ranch exclusive permanent rights over the dirt trails that once served as cattle drives, now lazily paved over and repurposed as the only 2 access roads into Willowbrook Estates. Without that land they had no legal ingress or egress. No driveway, no exit, no access to their McMansions or their fancy little community pool. Trapped, like rats in a glittering cage. I stared at that easement for a long time, heart thudding. It was beautiful. It was devastating. And it was ironclad. I brought in a retired surveyor, an old friend with the kind of gear that puts rental equipment to shame. We spent 3 days walking the line, driving stakes into the ground where the legal boundaries lay. The verdict? That new fence wasn't just trespassing. It violated county setbacks, ignored environmental protections, and sat square on protected land. Which meant their insurance voided. One scraped knee on that fence and the board wasn't just liable. Their homes, savings, and retirement funds were all on the chopping block. I gave them a week just to let it settle in. During that time I prepped, filed notices, drafted complaints, hired a lawyer who grinned like a wolf when he saw the mountain of evidence I handed him. Then I got to work on Operation Irongate. If they wanted a fence war, I'd show them how it's done, legally, thoroughly, and with the full blessing of county code. I filed for permits. I cited safety concerns and neighborhood visual cohesion, borrowing language straight from their own handbook. Then came the steel, 8-foot wrought iron panels, tamper-proof locks, security-grade gates, the kind of stuff you see around prisons. Karen came charging up my drive, red-faced and fuming, HOA board in tow. I handed her a copy of their own rules and smiled. Just improving the neighborhood. They were powerless. I had the permits, the easement, and the law on my side. The gates went up at both entrances, because both roads were illegally built across my land. I mounted polished brass signs, private property, access by permission only, and guess who had the only keys? Cars backed up. Delivery trucks turned around. Board members held frantic driveway meetings. A few tried to force the locks, until the sheriff's department, alerted by my security cameras, warned them to back off or face charges. Karen left me a voicemail full of barely suppressed rage, threatening legal action, city intervention, whatever leverage she thought she had left. But it was too late. The trap they built for me had become their cage, and I was the one holding the lock. She still had it. I saved the voicemail, of course. Might come in handy later. The truth was setting in. Without my permission, without my key, the entire Willowbrook HOA was trapped inside their own neighborhood. They had fenced themselves in, and now the man they tried to bully off his own land held the only way out. And I was just getting started. The first morning after Operation Irongate kicked off was one I'd remember for the rest of my life. I woke to the smell of fresh coffee and the sight of a line of idling cars stretching down Willowbrook Lane. Their bumpers gleamed in the early sun like a parade of trapped, anxious ants. Horns honked in sharp bursts, frustration ricocheting off the freshly installed iron fence. Through the bars, I spotted Karen Abernathy herself, pacing like a woman possessed, barking into her Bluetooth headset and waving at the growing crowd like some frantic general rallying defeated troops. I leaned back in my porch chair, sipped my coffee, and smiled. Poetic justice had never tasted so sweet. The gate itself was a work of art, heavy-duty steel, double-locked, reinforced with an electronic keypad requiring a code that only I had. I'd placed it right where Willowbrook Lane met the county road, the only true way in or out unless someone fancied a brutal 15-mile detour across private farmland and tire-shredding dirt trails. I'd already filed the proper paperwork with the county, formally closing those access paths under the legal authority of the Miller easement. The roads were mine now. Legally. Permanently. It didn't take long for the HOA to realize just how deep they were buried. Within the first hour, Karen had called the sheriff's office, screeching about unlawful imprisonment and emergency access violations. I watched from my porch as a county cruiser rolled up and Sheriff Darnell stepped out, adjusting his belt as he surveyed the scene. He was tall, slow-moving, with a handlebar mustache that made him look like he'd stepped out of a sepia-toned photograph, and he'd known my family for decades. Karen stormed up to him the second his boots hit gravel, waving papers and jabbing a finger toward my gate. I couldn't hear the words, but the wild gestures told the story. Darnell listened quietly, then turned and waved me over. I took my time, coffee mug still in hand. "Morning, Jack," he said with a tip of his hat. "Morning, Sheriff," I replied. Karen was practically vibrating. "This man has unlawfully imprisoned an entire neighborhood. He's blocking a public road. You have to make him open that gate right now." Darnell raised an eyebrow and turned to me. "Jack." I handed him a thick folder, already prepared naturally. Inside, the original Miller easement, county permits, certified surveys, and the legal notices I'd served the HOA weeks earlier. He flipped through the pages slowly, his mustache twitching. Finally he looked up and said, "Well, I'll be damned." He turned back to Karen. "Ma'am, this gate is on Mr. Miller's property. Always has been. Road easement was never legally transferred to public use. And from what I see here, your HOA folks were the first to break the law by building an illegal fence on his land." Karen sputtered. But, you mean we're stuck here?" Darnell shrugged. "Looks that way. Should have thought twice before annexing land that doesn't belong to you." I tipped my hat and strolled back to the porch, feeling lighter than I had in years. By noon, panic had taken root. Parents trying to get kids to school pounded on the gate, shouting in vain. Delivery trucks showed up, saw the chaos, and turned right back around. Trash pickup never came. Uber Eats canceled all orders. Electricians, plumbers, even mobile vets all declined to enter. Inside the neighborhood, chaos bloomed. One guy in a work uniform tried to scale the fence with a ladder, only to tumble backward into a rosebush. Two women argued on the sidewalk over who should have planned for this. Kids in wrinkled uniforms wailed from the backs of SUVs while parents screamed into phones. HOA board members scurried between houses like rats on a sinking ship, trying to calm the rising tide of rage. It only got better when residents started demanding answers. Emergency HOA meetings erupted into driveway shouting matches. Karen and the board tried to spin it, said the minor expansion onto my land was standard, that it was all for the good of the community. But the truth was impossible to dodge now. They had built their little empire on a lie. And they were all paying the price. Word spread fast. News crews arrived. Cameras rolled just outside the gate, filming the unrest like it was the pilot for a new reality show. Reporters poked microphones through the bars, interviewing angry residents. One poor guy in a Willowbrook HOA, a proud resident shirt nearly cried on camera, saying he'd lose his job if he couldn't leave that day. Karen tried to issue a statement, flanked by ashen-faced board members, but the crowd shouted her down every time. I let them stew for 3 days. 3 days of missed work, missed school, rotting trash, empty pantries and boiling tempers. 3 days of the Willowbrook dream turning into a sun-baked, suburban prison. Then, on the morning of day 4, I posted a large notice at the gate. Big bold letters. No one could miss it: complete removal of all illegally constructed HOA fencing. Payment of damages to Miller Ranch, $75,000. Full dissolution of the Willowbrook Estates HOA board. Public written apology posted at both community entrances for no less than 90 days. Future access subject to easement maintenance fees. The notice was notarized, documented, and formally served to both Karen and the county. The board blustered, of course. They threatened lawsuits, emergency injunctions, all the usual noise. But once their lawyers saw the evidence, once they realized their insurance was void and their personal assets were at risk, they quickly changed their tune. Karen came to my porch that evening, flanked by the last few board members. They looked like they'd been chewing lemons. She clutched a manila folder with stiff fingers. "We are prepared to meet your terms," she said through clenched teeth. I leaned back in my chair, laced my fingers behind my head, and let the silence linger just long enough to watch her jaw tighten. "Good," I said at last. "I expect the apology posted by sunrise. And have that damn fence down by the weekend." She turned without a word, her shoulders stiff with humiliation. And I just smiled. As she turned to leave, I added, "Oh, and Karen." She stopped just barely. "Next time you think about stealing a man's land," I said, "make sure he's not smarter, meaner, and 10 times more stubborn than you." She didn't respond. Just kept walking, her designer heels sinking into the dust of a driveway she no longer controlled. The war was over. And I had won. The collapse of the Willowbrook HOA wasn't just a failure, it was a slow-motion train wreck of such cinematic proportions, the entire county came out to watch. For a week, news crews camped outside the iron gate like vultures circling a carcass, jamming microphones through the bars, filming teary-eyed residents pointing fingers in every direction except the mirror. Helicopters flew overhead, capturing the sterile rows of McMansions like cages in a suburban zoo, trapped by their own arrogance. It was glorious. It was disastrous. It was exactly what they deserved. By day 2, the first board member cracked. Martha Sims, the treasurer, stood in front of Channel 5's camera and sobbed her resignation, blaming Karen Abernathy for everything. Illegal land grabs, secret votes, and plans to hit me with nuisance fines until I caved. Then she handed over a file of meeting minutes so damning, I couldn't have scripted it better myself. By day 4, real estate agents began appearing, slipping in through the emergency access gate to snap photos of cracked sidewalks, dying lawns, and residents pacing like caged lions. Listings flooded the internet with desperate phrases. Motivated seller. Price to move. Sold as is. Translation? Please, for the love of God, buy this house and get me out of here. But no one was buying. Who wanted to live in a neighborhood famous for being literally locked inside? Property values plummeted, 30%, then 40%, then 50%. Some families abandoned their homes outright, foreclosure notices fluttering in the breeze alongside sagging patio furniture and plastic toys left behind in overgrown yards. The ones who stayed gathered under flickering street lamps for emergency town halls, shouting about blame and rebuilding their broken little kingdom. Karen Abernathy was the last to fall. She fought like a drowning woman clinging to a sinking ship, held emergency meetings, tried to reframe the narrative, claimed she'd been misled by complicated land records and legal jargon. But nobody bought it anymore. Not even her allies. When her own neighbors threatened to sue her personally for fiduciary mismanagement, she finally cracked. She sold her house at a massive loss and packed up her monogrammed pillows and crystal chandeliers under the scrutiny of half the neighborhood and 3 different news crews. She didn't say goodbye. Didn't even look back. Just climbed into the passenger seat of a battered U-Haul, hid behind oversized sunglasses, and disappeared down a road she no longer had any right to claim. And me? I reopened my land. Slowly. Deliberately. I dismantled pieces of Operation Iron Gate, but not all of it. The perimeter fence stayed, tall and proud, a monument to what happens when people forget who truly owns the dirt beneath their feet. At the main gate, where Willowbrook Lane once greeted visitors with brass plaques and hanging flower baskets, I installed a new sign. Heavy iron, hand-forged by a blacksmith friend. The letters were the size of dinner plates, polished until they gleamed in the sun. Private property. Trespassers will be treated to a tour. Not the good kind. Beneath it, a smaller plaque inscribed in swirling script. Miller Ranch, St. 1932. Respect the land or find out why you should. Word spread fast. Nobody crossed the fence line anymore. Not the kids on scooters, not the dog walkers who used to let their labradoodles squat on my pastures. Not the nosy suburbanites who once peered through my windows to count how tall my grass grew. They stayed firmly on their side of the iron bars, casting glances like peasants outside castle walls. And the best part? They told stories. Whispers began among the new families, those who hadn't lived through the great lock-in but had heard about it from embittered neighbors. Stories about the old man on the hill. The one with the keys. The one who watched everything with eagle eyes and a memory as long as the county line. Don't mess with old man Miller, they said at barbecues and PDA meetings. He's the king of Willowbrook now. King. I like the sound of that. Over the following months, I restored the ranch to the paradise it had always been. Rebuilt the old barn with rough-hewn beams and a coat of red so bright it hurt your eyes at noon. Restocked the pastures with goats, mules, and a few sun-loving cows that lounged proudly in full view of the fence line. I planted wildflowers along the creek bed, untamed and brilliant, a riot of color that mocked the HOA's withered, over-manicured flower beds. In the evenings, after a long day working the land, I'd sit on my porch with a cold drink, listening to the wind whistle through the iron gate. I hung a wind chime there, an old one my grandmother gave me when I was just a boy. Its soft music floated down Willowbrook Lane like a ghostly lullaby for the families still trapped inside their shrinking world. And the keys? They stayed on my belt. Heavy. Gleaming. A satisfying weight. Some of the braver residents came knocking eventually, offering peace, cooperation, a new chapter. I listened. I nodded. Then I smiled, the same slow smile I gave Karen that final day. No deals, I'd say, tapping the keys on my hip. You made your bed. Now sleep in it. Sometimes I'd catch them staring at the gates from their driveways, hands on hips, their faces tight with regret. I didn't wave. I didn't nod. I let the wind speak for me, rattling the bars with a groan that sounded an awful lot like a warning. On the last day of summer, exactly 1 year after Operation Iron Gate began, I watched the final moving truck bounce down Willowbrook Lane. A battered green van piled high with sagging mattresses and dusty furniture. The driver fumbled with the keypad, still dead, then turned and took the emergency gravel trail out of town. Just as the truck disappeared over the rise, the wind kicked up and slammed the gate shut behind it. The clang echoed through the valley, up the porch steps into the soles of my boots. A final, resounding period on a story that began with one arrogant woman and a clipboard. I leaned back in my chair. The keys jingled softly at my belt. I took a long, slow sip of sweet tea. Peace had returned to Miller Ranch. And as long as I had breath in my lungs and boots on my feet, it would stay that way. Because out here, under the wide open sky, there's only one rule that matters. Respect the land. Or find out why you should.